Ignatius Press and the Augustine Institute present The Formed Book Club. Catholic book lovers unpacking good books, chapter by chapter. If you like us, please help us by subscribing and by reviewing us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you might listen. And don't forget to sign up for weekly updates and study questions at formedbookclub.ignatius.com.
Welcome back to the Formed Book Club, or if you're a first-time listener or viewer, welcome to the Formed Book Club. We're beginning this session with a book by my philosopher friend, Father Robert McTeigue, called Real Philosophy for Real People, subtitled Tools for Truthful Living. So this is a little different book from what we've been covering in the past. How do you, Joseph and Vivian, how do you want to approach this?
Vivian, I defer to you first, trying to be a gentleman.
How do we want to approach it? Well, since it is rather philosophical in a formal sense of the word, I think I would prefer if Father Fessio were to take the role of the teacher, and I'll take the role of the student.
We can, Vivian, you and I can stand on the shoulders of giants. Take it easy.
Yeah, I'll be lucky if I get to his kneecaps.
That's very good. Well, speaking of teachers, it's clear that Father McTeigue is a teacher. I mean, he's not just a person who's reflecting on himself or on the history of philosophy, but he's taught this, and over the years, he's developed a way of presenting it, which I think is very accessible to anybody who wants to give it a try. It has a basic intelligence and education. In the parable he tells, he illustrates the situation where if you're trying to find out what moral philosophy can tell us from history of philosophy, it's very bewildering because, you have Aristotle with his teleological ethics, that is, everything is aimed towards an end or a goal. You got Kant with his deontological ethics, that is to say, it's all based on duty. And then there's everything in between and beyond. So it seems like it's simply a complex set of completing and contradicting theories, and you don't know what to do. When I finished that little parable, I put a note on it saying, Gilson, the unity of philosophical experience, but he actually has a note to Gilson on page 19, I think, at the very bottom of the page. And that's this book. Another book, which we could discuss sometime, by Etienne Gilson, who was one of the great Thomist philosophers of the 20th century, one of the two great ones, Maritain being the other. And the subtitle here is The Medieval Experiment, the Cartesian Experiment, the Modern Experiment. And what Gilson does in this book is phenomenal. He shows that what looks like contradiction and a meandering view, always changing, there's a common unity to it. There's a unity to the experience, and it's not just a plethora of contradicting views. So that's a great book. Good books lead you to other good books. That's just the way they are. And so this one, I think, if you want to pursue that particular idea of where do we find some kind of unitary philosophy, the perennial philosophy, this is the book, Etienne Gilson, Unity of Philosophical Experience, by Ignatius Press. So that's a parable. He starts with the preface. That's a good place to start.
Father, can I come back to the parable? Do you mind?
Okay, sure.
First of all, as you were talking about Gilson's thesis there, that the apparent contradictions actually have a unity, I can't help but think of the Chestertonian concept of paradox, apparent contradictions that point to a deeper truth. But actually, when I read this parable at the beginning, first of all, I thought, thanks be to God that we actually are reading a book of philosophy by Father McTeigue. Because first of all, I can hear his voice. Obviously, I was Ave Maria for many years, and spend time at the pub with him, what have you. But also, I've been on his radio show. But he's Irish, and I mean now in the best sense of the word. He has the gift of Blarney and the gift of the gab, and he's going to he's going to convey truths to you, but he's going to do it through story and anecdote. It's not just going to be abstract concepts. And so, for instance, this parable at the beginning, it's marvelous, very simple dialogue between two people, and then it ends with, "How should Al respond to Fred?" ? And you can just imagine this is that Father McTeigue has used this in his classes, right? At the beginning of class, he sets up the whole semester with this scenario. And so, yeah, you're right. He's a teacher par excellence. I can hear his voice. He's has this Irish gift of storytelling, and it does actually add a spice and an accessibility to the whole book, at least for me.
Yeah, so there's that personal touch he has in the telling of stories and giving examples. At the same time, it's a highly structured book. I mean, you could probably summarize this book in 2 or 3 diagrams, really, but he unpacks it or teases out the deeper meaning there. I always like it when an author tells me what he's going to do. And on page 20, about a third of the way up from the bottom, he says, "My intent is to put together a set of philosophical tools," that's the toolbox on the front here, "to help one to know what one should know and to do what one should do and to face challenges and contradictions when and as they occur." And then on the next page, 21 towards the top, new paragraph, "I want to assemble a set of philosophical tools that may be seen to be so intuitively interconnected and easily usable that once understood, they can be used readily whether one is in the classroom or in the pub, in the church or in the home, on the shop floor or on the floor of the Senate." So very practical is his intent here. Put those tools together.
And he uses the image of the to show you that he wants a practical outcome here. He uses the image of the Navy SEAL training, being trained in marksmanship and getting to the point where it's one action of acquire and fire. He wants you to be able to be so philosophically trained that thinking and doing become an integrated whole in your life.
Yeah, and I love the other metaphors of the toolbox, the Navy SEALs, but at the top of page 21, a philosophical Swiss Army knife. So basically something you can carry in your pocket or the pocket of your mind, and there's something in it that's going to be useful for every situation,
To tell you the truth, at first I thought that there was speaking of contradictions and paradoxes, I thought there was a kind of contradiction inherent in the idea of making philosophy useful. That somehow philosophy in and of itself, a love of wisdom for itself, that the idea of an applied philosophy was somehow a contradiction. But there's this beautiful quote. I hate to keep jumping about, but there's a beautiful quote here from Thomas Aquinas. Maybe that's later on, where, it's on page 25, the bottom of page 25. Thomas Aquinas said, now I love this. The reason why the philosopher is compared to the poet is that both are concerned with wonders. For the myths with which the poets deal are composed of wonders, and the philosophers themselves were moved to philosophize as a result of wonder. And since wonder stems from ignorance, they were obviously moved to philosophize in order to escape from ignorance. In order to. As soon as I saw that, I go, okay, there's the philosophy is not just an abstract exercise that has no practical benefit. We're trying to escape from ignorance. And not only ignorance, but lies. This is about truthful living. We're surrounded by things that are untrue. And how do we Find the truth.
How do we assess truth claims? That's his big question. And there's going to be a triadic structure. I also mentioned it now because it fits in what you just said, Vivian, that it is true that there is a dimension of philosophy which is purposeless. It's in order to escape ignorance, yes, but knowing for the sake of knowing, as Aristotle says, man desires to know. That's part of our nature, to desire to know.
Right.
And just to know for the sake of knowing, not necessarily of doing anything. But so that is the deepest level of philosophy called metaphysics. What is the real? What is it? I just want to know what it is.
Right.
But that part of what is human beings. I mean, metaphysics, philosophy, a being wants to know about everything which is. God, angels, human beings, rocks, plants, what you name it. If it is, we want to know something about it. But there's a subset of beings which are human beings. And therefore, philosophy wants to find out what it is to be a human being compared to non-human beings, Well, then, part of the human being is freedom of will, intellect and will, and making choices. And that is where morality is, and that was become practical because now understanding moral choices, that's part of being human. So how do you determine, and here it's very practical, what are the right choices and what are the wrong choices? So that's just ethical wedding cake, but it's this triad,
Yes.
metaphysics,
Yes.
anthropology, ethics.
Right.
They're all of a piece. That's his big point is that, like he says, I think in somewhere, if you pull on the string, you get the whole rug. Everything is interconnected. So,
Can I go back to page 22, Father, just very briefly?
Sure.
Because there's a wonderful, just a very quick, a very brief, pithy definition of leisure, or leisure, if you insist, on the middle of page 22. Leisure is a good done for its own sake and not for the gain of something else. The key thing for me here is that leisure is something that we do that's good. In other words, it's not a distraction. It's not, I'm so stressed, I'm going to go and get drunk. It's something which we do that's good. It's a virtuous activity, not a distraction from the humdrum, to use Thomas Howard's phraseology.
Well, should we jump into chapter 1, thinking and living humanly well?
Yeah, sure.
Again, he tells you what he's going to do, page 30 and page 31, middle of 30. He says, for millennia, men have asked in one form or another, philosopher Immanuel Kant's 3 great questions. What can I know? What should I do? What may I hope? And then on page 31, new paragraph at the bottom, he says, in this chapter, we will begin our project of coming to clarity about the real, the human, and the good. There's that triad, the real, metaphysics, the human, anthropology, the good, ethics, and morality.
And then continue, Father, the very next sentence.
Okay.
Will lay the foundation for developing a coherent and persuasive account of how to answer Kant's 3 great questions.
Okay. Then I wasn't going to say anything about the range of education on page 32, but if you want to mention something about that, go ahead. I kind of want to jump to page 40.
Well, I'm happy to just sum up what it's all about. On page 5,
yeah,
he says, if his education, he's talking about the medical student, why this is so important. He says, first of all, he says, a sound education reaches a student at all levels. And then he says, he gives the doctor as an example. If his education provides him only with information and makes no effort at forming his character at the deeper, informal, private levels, he will be a highly competent, morally dangerous doctor. He will be at best an amoral technician armed with a scalpel and a prescription pad He will not be able to identify readily the ultimate purposes and moral limits and obligations of his work as a doctor. Who would want to be the patient of such a doctor?
Yeah.
So let's go to page 40, where he diagrams this very important concept which he develops throughout this book, thinking in four directions. And at the center of that diagram is a little box which says truth claim. And that could be a claim about the way things are. You know, the world is only made up of matter. There's nothing transcendent in it. Or it could be a claim about the truth of our action. It's good to kill the child in the mother's womb if it makes it's more convenient for her. I mean, that's a truth claim that people make about action. So,
and in between is the truth claim about what it means to be human. Are we just a bag of moving molecules?
That's right. But again, that's the wedding cake we'll get to. Anthropology in between real metaphysics and moral choices. So the vertical directions there of a truth claim is, well, objections. What are the opposing viewpoints? And below, supports. What supports the claim? And he uses Thomas Aquinas as an example here, because every question Thomas asks in the Summa is then followed immediately by three objections to it, and then three responses to the objections. But to me, the most important thing here, and the thing which most characterizes what I know of Father McTeigue, and what has got him into so much trouble in his life as a Jesuit, he's been thrown out of at least one school, that when there's a truth claim, it has to rest on something, antecedent. If this is true, what makes it be true? And if it's true, consequently, what else is true? What logically follows? And so I've seen him so many times both do this and tell about doing it in the past. Someone will make a claim, and they say, oh, well, if that's true, would this follow from that? And he leads them into absurdity, you know. Or he said, well, if that's true, then you must hold this about the real, right? Oh, no, I don't do that. He has what I have always called a bad attitude. I mean, when he comes across nonsense, truth claims that won't be justified, he just picks away. Oh, well, you say this. Well, would that entail this? I mean, he just leads them down this logical track until they just become infuriated with him.
There's another wonderful story he tells. I don't want to jump the gun. I'm quite happy to wait till we get to it. But just as a teaser, he talks about when he was asked to go into an 8th grade class where the general consensus was basically a morally relativistic consensus. And then he goes through how he illustrates to them what that works out to mean in practice with a physical demonstration, which is brilliant. Another example of what I said about Father McTeigue being able to bring philosophy alive by telling stories, giving anecdotes. But you're completely correct, as this diagram shows, also to be very structured in the way that he proceeds with his arguments. And I circle that diagram top of page 40 because it's so clear. And it's a pity that really this is an audio medium and we can't sort of flash
up. Well, I wonder, because my camera's right here. Look.
Well, there we are. That works.
Can you see it?
Oh, look at yeah. Pull it back. Pull it back a little bit. There we go. There we go. Okay.
There we go.
We got it there.
So that works. Well done.
All right. Very good, Vivian.
It's actually what I was talking about on page 43. Can I just very quickly summarize that?
Sure.
So I've just, it's a whole page basically because I'm page 44, but I'm just going to read up. So it basically says that a few years ago, he was contacted by a teacher of an 8th grade class. And this teacher was horrified when her 8th grade students all equated freedom with license. So real freedom is, to quote, equals, I get to do whatever I want and no one may tell me otherwise, which is basically the radical relativist position. And then, so he goes to the classroom. I can just picture this. And he basically goes in and asks two girls that wear eyeglasses to give him their glasses.
To examine. He wants to examine them.
Yeah, wants to examine the glasses, and they give them to him, and then he says, "These glasses are mine now. I am using my freedom to declare them mine. I have not stolen them. I have merely relocated them." And then further down, he says, turning to the ladies, whose eyeglasses I now firmly held, I said, "Ladies, I outweigh the two of you put together. So if you try forcibly to relocate your eyeglasses from my hand to yours, I will use my freedom to smack you down." And then he says, "Do you want to live in a world wherein this sort of thing will happen to you every day for the rest of your lives?" That's basically survival of the most ruthless. And then the final sentence at the end of it, then immediately they said, "Then we want to find a better definition of freedom." I mean, it's a perfect response, right?
Yes.
They basically thought, well, that was dumb. So what is freedom?
Right.
By the demonstration.
And that's his example on the very elementary level in two senses, schoolgirls. But he applies that in more sophisticated ways the higher up the physical ladder he goes. And I've seen him with PhDs and professors who also can talk nonsense and just completely destroy them. It's one reason he was thrown out of not Scranton. It was that other Jesuit university in Upper New York. I forget what it's called. All right. Well, if we jump to page 47 at the bottom, we'll see his other diagram. Viv, you
Here,
want
I'll
to
hold it up.
hold it up for us?
Perfect.
This is the ethical wedding cake. We've talked about it already. It's a triad with metaphysics as the foundation, anthropology as a subset based on metaphysics, and ethics on the top is a working out of anthropological principles. And so he'll be referring to this thing again and again in the book. But his point is, and you can't maybe see it too well, but there's a little gray bar that they've got to be consistent. If you have a certain ethics, it only work with a certain kind of anthropology, and that only work with a certain kind of metaphysics. They all go together.
Father, if would you mind if there's on page 48 and 49?
Sure.
Because I'm not a philosopher. What he does here very succinctly is to give the definitions of metaphysics, anthropology, and ethics. And he gives a paragraph on each. We don't have to read those, but metaphysics is the discipline that investigates the real as such and strives to offer a systematic, comprehensive account of the real as such. And then a few questions. Metaphysical questions. What are the ingredients for the real? What is the nature of time? What is the relationship between the real and time? What is the origin of the real? What is the purpose of the real? Why is there something rather than nothing? So these fundamental questions. Then anthropology is the discipline that investigates the nature of the human person. And then ethics as a discipline is the science and art of evaluating human behavior in terms of ought and or not. And he gives some examples from ethics on page 49. What is good? What is evil? How can we know right from wrong? What is the nature of law, obligation, sanction, prohibition, duty, conscience, virtue, vice? How can one live a praiseworthy life? Why live a praiseworthy life? I mean, these are really prompting and provoking us into asking questions that most of us don't ask very often. And I think this is a great beginner's book for philosophy.
Yes, and I found in my own life, there are certain times when I had a specific question on something. And once I had the question, then I would go look for the answer, read, do research, that sort of thing, conversations. And when I found the answer, I never forgot it because I was looking for that. Whereas if you're teaching a class and all you're doing is giving the answers, people are daydreaming or, they don't realize what's an answer to. In fact, I mean, not to place myself as a model of the teacher here, but I remember when I would teach my classes, taking a book like Lewis's Miracles or Chesterton's Everlasting Men, I have study questions for them. But at the beginning of the class, I'd ask them to answer these questions. And I'd confuse them. I said, well, that can't be right, can it? Because, I wanted to confuse them because I wanted them to realize, well, I don't really understand this as much as I thought I did, and get them in that idea, well, wait, what is the answer? But at the end of class, the idea was always to relieve the confusion by answering the question, so that by getting them confused and inquisitive and trying to find out something that they now know they don't know, when you explain it to them, it's the aha, eureka, I found it. And that's what he's doing here.
Yeah, at the moment, our daughter Evangeline is very preoccupied with whodunits and mystery stories, and she got some jigsaw puzzles. Kristen, you put jigsaw puzzle, and as you said with jigsaw puzzles, there are clues that are revealed, and you have to, find out who the criminal was. That's exactly what you basically what you've done there, is that you've actually confused them by now what we have is a mystery to be solved. Right? It's now a whodunit, or a what is it? And so you start giving them clues, and they start now they're on the scent, and then you get the resolution.
I would like to point out something about this cake.
Okay.
That says a lot about what this book is. Notice how there's no category of religion. A lot of people think that these questions, what is, what should be done, what's a good life, are religious questions. And it's not to say that religion doesn't touch on these things, but he's showing a way to have these conversations that can avoid sectarian sorts of arguments. And I would say that this is a really important tool, especially now, because if you notice, the abortion issue vis-a-vis the Biden administration is being couched as whether or not he's a good Catholic.
Right.
Don't go there. No, what we want to do is this.
Right.
Talk metaphysics and anthropology and ethics so that we can come to a knowing and an understanding and a doing that is worthy of us as human beings. And if we get dragged into it as a religious conversation, we're going to lose every time.
Yes, but he, in his very shrewd way, starts out philosophically like this. But when we get to the chapter on worldviews, on what metaphysics works, he'll talk about theism, deism, naturalism, and nihilism as kind of the four main ones.
Yes.
And he will show that, okay, well, yeah, let's just start with human reason, and then we're going to find out that if you have a worldview, metaphysics down there, that doesn't include something transcendent, you're not going to be able to have any kind of ethics which is sustainable. So
right, but still, Father, I would say that it's still not a sectarian, on a level of sectarian religion. And I love later on, we'll probably discuss this later, how he shows how theology and philosophy
intersect,
and can talk to each other and so on. I'm just saying he's giving us a model for talking about these things that I think is very helpful in not getting dragged into sectarian kinds of debates.
I agree. Well, actually, I think let's not start another chapter because we've kind of taken most of our time now, but we'll start next session with chapter 2, Faith and Reason Who Needs Them. And I propose that people read up to and including chapter 4, Metaphysics, a Systematic Account of the Real. Does that sound okay, Joseph?
That sounds perfect, yeah.
All right. Thanks, everyone. God bless you all, and hope to see you next week on the Formed Book Club.
If you enjoyed this discussion, please help spread the word about the Formed Book Club by subscribing to the podcast and writing a review. You can sign up for weekly updates at formedbookclub.ignatius.com.